Daddy taught me three things before the desert took him: how to shoot, how to wait, and how to hear what others miss. That last one saved my life more times than the first two combined. August 1991, Mojave Desert, Nevada. The kind of heat that doesn't just burn your skin, it rewires your brain. Makes you see things that aren't there, makes you miss things that are. I was 28 years old. Captain Sienna Graves, United States Army, sniper. Though that word never quite captured what I did. Snipers shoot targets. I hunted ghosts. The armory at Outpost Sentinel smelled like gun oil and old discipline. 4 in the morning, the only time the concrete walls weren't radiating heat like a kiln. I sat alone at a steel workbench, cleaning my rifle, the M24 sniper weapon system, Remington 100 action, heavy free-floating barrel, no computer chips, no satellite uplinks, just physics, chemistry. And the steady hand of the operator. Some people pray in churches. I prayed with a cleaning rod. The rhythm was meditative. Slide the rod through the barrel. Check the rifling under harsh fluorescent light. Wipe away carbon, copper fouling, anything that might throw off a shot by even a fraction of an inch. Because at 2,000 yards, a fraction of an inch becomes 6 feet of miss. And 6 feet means someone dies who shouldn't. My father taught me that before the machine killed him. The steel door groaned open behind me. I didn't turn around, didn't need to. I knew the sound of his boots. Gez. Donovan, Master Sergeant, 58 years old. Call sign Flint. Because the man was harder than stone and twice as quiet, he walked to the adjacent workbench, unrolled a massive paper map, topographical, Mojave Basin, elevation contours, magnetic declination warnings. The kind of map that didn't require batteries. We worked in silence. It was our language. Flint had been my spotter for 3 years. 3 years of hunting things that didn't want to be found, 3 years of reading wind that couldn't be seen, 3 years of watching each other's backs in places that didn't exist on any official record. He was the best wind reader I'd ever met. And I'd met a lot. I lifted the barrel to the light one final time. Perfect. The rifling spiraled into infinity, no fouling, no imperfections, just cold, clean, lethal precision. I set it down on the neoprene mat, reached for the bolt. That's when the door slammed open. The crack echoed through the armory like a gunshot. I looked up. Flint's eyes shifted to the entrance. His face remained expressionless. But his hand moved an inch closer to the sidearm on his hip. Brigadier General Marcus Thornwell marched into the room. The man moved like he was permanently addressing a parade ground. Shoulders back, chin up, every step a declaration of authority. He was 52, graying at the temples, uniform starched to knife-edge creases, not a single speck of desert dust on his boots. Which told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't been outside in days. He brought 2 nervous aides with him, young lieutenants clutching digital clipboards, and a civilian contractor in an expensive suit. Carrying a silver briefcase like it contained nuclear launch codes, Thornwell stopped at the end of my workbench, looked down at the disassembled M24. His upper lip curled. Captain Graves. His voice was designed to fill briefing rooms, to intimidate subordinates, to project confidence even when doubt was screaming underneath. I stood up, came to attention, boots together, eyes forward. General Thornwell. My voice was flat, calm, the voice I used when calling coordinates under fire. It didn't break for anyone, not even a 1-star general with an ego the size of Nevada. Thornwell leaned over the bench, tapped a manicured finger against the rifle stock. This is a relic, Captain. A museum piece. The military is moving forward. We're digitizing the battle space. My new perimeter defense grid can track a coyote at 2,000 yards and categorize its thermal signature in 3 seconds. Yet here you are, polishing a piece of iron like some kind of craftsman. I didn't blink. The rifle works, sir. It doesn't require batteries. Can't be jammed by an electromagnetic pulse. Doesn't broadcast its position to the enemy. His jaw tightened. I could see the muscle working under his skin. He didn't like being countered, especially not by a captain. Particularly not by a woman whose personnel file he lacked the security clearance to fully access. His eyes drifted up to my right shoulder. The patch, it was small. Subdued, stitched in charcoal and flat black thread, the silhouette of an owl, wings swept back, descending into darkness. No unit designation, no numbered division, no airborne wings, just the owl. Thornwell stared at it for 3 long seconds. Then his sneer returned. And then there's this. He pointed at the patch. I've reviewed every authorized unit insignia in the United States Army, but I've read the uniform regulations cover to cover. That piece of thread is not on any list. It looks like something you bought at a surplus store. I kept my eyes on the wall behind his head. It's an authorized insignia, General. Augurized by whom? His voice rose half an octave. The aides shifted uncomfortably. Because it certainly wasn't authorized by me, and you're currently standing in my facility. On my grid. It was issued by my parent command, sir, which is classified, sir. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. Across the room, Flint hadn't moved, but I could feel his attention sharpening. The way a wolf's does when it smells blood. Thornwell's face began to flush, a creeping red heat that started at his collar and worked its way up. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, grief. I'd seen his file 6 months ago, February 1991, his son, Second Lieutenant Ryan Thornwell, 23 years old, Ranger qualified, killed in the Gulf War. Friendly fire incident during the chaos of the highway of death, a targeting error, a split-second mistake by an operator who trusted a computer screen more than his own eyes. Thornwell blamed people after that, started trusting systems instead, cold, digital, unfeeling systems that didn't make mistakes, except they did, they just made different ones. Take it off. His voice dropped an octave. Dangerous now. Remove that unauthorized flare immediately. That is a direct order from a general officer. I didn't move my hands from my sides. I'm not authorized to remove it, General. My orders mandate its wear while deployed. You're deployed to the middle of nowhere, Captain. You're deployed to a sandbox to test equipment. You're not a ghost. You're not special. You're a sniper clinging to outdated methodology while the future passes you by. He stepped back, breathing hard now. His pride was stinging. He couldn't physically force me to remove the patch. And a court-martial over uniform regulations would inevitably draw attention from the Pentagon brass who'd sent me here. He needed to break me a different way. He needed to prove that my methods were useless in his shiny digital world. A cold smile spread across his face. Fine, Captain. If you're so committed to the old ways, I have a task perfectly suited to your specific talents. He turned to one of his aides. Lieutenant. Where did we archive the raw acoustic data from the legacy perimeter microphones? The young officer scrambled with his clipboard. Sub-level 3, sir. The old communications bunker. It's on magnetic tape. The digital mainframe rejected it as atmospheric anomaly and background radiation. Excellent. Thornwell turned back to me. His smile widened. 3 months of raw, unfiltered desert noise, Captain. Thousands of hours of wind, static, thunder, nothing. My computers analyzed it in 10 seconds and classified it as garbage. I want you to review it manually, every single inch of tape. I want a detailed report on every coyote howl, every rainstorm, every gust of wind. It was a punishment designed to humiliate. The equivalent of ordering a master tactician to count grains of sand. Isolation, boredom, absolute irrelevance. You will not see the sun until you've audited that entire archive, Captain. Perhaps listening to static will teach you that the era of the lone wolf is over. He spun on his heel, marched toward the door. His entourage scurried after him. The heavy steel door slammed shut, leaving me and Flint alone in the sudden quiet. Flint looked at the closed door, then down at his map, sub-level 3. His voice was gravel grinding against stone. The ventilation down there failed in 1988. It's going to be 110 degrees in that room. I reached down, picked up the bolt of my rifle, slid it into the receiver, locked the lugs into place with a definitive metallic clack. Then I'll pack extra water. Sub-level 3 was a graveyard of the Cold War, a long, narrow concrete bunker buried deep beneath the Mojave Rock. The smell hit me first. Ozone, heated dust, decaying magnetic tape. Like old books left in an attic for 30 years. The only light came from rows of flickering green-tinted fluorescent tubes. They hummed, an irregular electrical buzz that made my teeth ache. Along the far wall sat banks of massive Ampex reel-to-reel tape recorders, heavy analog beasts built from solid steel and brushed aluminum, covered in analog VU meters, thick black dials, toggle switches that looked like they belonged in a 1950s submarine. To General Thornwell, this room was a trash can. To me, it was an instrument panel. I spent the first 2 hours organizing. Discipline is the foundation of survival. Whether you're in a sniper hide or a windowless basement, I wiped down the work surfaces, cleaned the magnetic playheads with isopropyl alcohol and cotton swabs, ensuring flawless contact. I arranged the boxes of tapes in chronological order, 90 days of continuous recording, from hidden microphones scattered across miles of desert perimeter. Flint came down once, carrying a heavy steel thermos of black coffee, set it on the edge of the console without a word. Thornwell's running his new digital sweep upstairs. Flint leaned against the concrete wall. He's got screens showing everything from orbiting satellites down to the heat signature of a jackrabbit. He's convinced the perimeter is impenetrable. I unscrewed the cap of the thermos, poured coffee into the lid. Steam rose in the stale air. Computers only find what they're programmed to look for. I took a sip. Bitter. Perfect. And you? Flint's eyes were unreadable in the green light. I looked at the massive reels of tape. I looked for the spaces in between, placed the heavy over-ear headphones over my head. They were old military issue, designed to block out the noise of helicopter rotors. The world of the bunker faded away, replaced by absolute silence. I reached out, flipped the heavy toggle switch to play. The massive aluminum reels began to spin. For the first few days, it was exactly what Thornwell had promised. Crushing, endless wall of noise. Through the headphones, the Mojave Desert screamed. I heard the constant rushing roar of wind tearing through canyon walls, the violent crackle of distant dry lightning storms disrupting the electromagnetic field, the low structural groan of the earth heating under the sun, expanding, then shrinking under the freezing night sky. It was a chaotic symphony of nature. Most people would have gone mad within 72 hours. The human brain craves patterns. When it's fed nothing but random static, it begins to hallucinate, to invent voices in the noise, to create meaning where none exists. But my mind wasn't like most people's. My training had fundamentally rewired my auditory processing. I didn't just hear the noise. I dissected it. I used my hands to turn the heavy rotary knobs on the equalizer panel, physically slicing the audio spectrum. I rolled off the high-frequency hiss of the wind, boosted the low-end rumble to listen for the distant rhythmic thud of vehicular movement. I sat in the dim green light, eyes closed, breathing slowed to an almost imperceptible rhythm. Exactly as if I were behind the scope of my rifle I was hunting. The only difference was the camouflage. A week passed. Then, too, I slept on a canvas cot in the corner of the bunker, ate cold rations from foil pouches, spoke to no one but Flint, who came down twice a day with fresh coffee and topographic updates from the world above. Upstairs, General Thornwell was busy, entertaining defense contractors, boasting about his impenetrable digital fortress. Down below, I kept the reels spinning. I was on tape number 412, recorded 3 weeks prior, during the darkest hours of the night, specifically between 0200 and 0400 hours. The microphone was located in Grid Sector 7, a jagged, impassable stretch of rock known locally as the Devil's Anvil, completely ignored by Thornwell's foot patrols due to the extreme terrain. I was listening to a heavy windstorm. The audio was thick with the abrasive sound of sand striking the microphone housing, raw, chaotic, entirely natural. But then, my hands shot out. Hit the heavy steel stop button. The reels halted with a mechanical clunk. I opened my eyes. The green light of the bunker reflected in my irises. I sat perfectly still for 10 seconds, my brain processing the echo of what I'd just heard. It was infinitesimally small, a ghost in the machine. I hit rewind. The tape spooled backward with a high-pitched whine. I stopped it, reached for the equalizer panel, brutally cut the bass and mid-range frequencies, isolating the absolute highest edge of the treble spectrum. Turned the main volume dial up until the background hiss was a deafening roar. Pressed play. Through the blinding wall of white noise, I heard it again. Click, clack, click. It wasn't a rock striking a rock. It wasn't a beetle clicking its mandibles. It possessed a harsh, squared-off audio waveform that did not occur in nature. It was mechanical. It was intentional. I leaned forward, my heart rate remaining completely steady, but my focus narrowing to a razor's edge. I grabbed a graphite pencil, a lined yellow notepad, rewound the tape again, slowed the playback speed to exactly half. The sound stretched out, became deeper, more distinct. It was a stutter, a rhythmic, deliberate stutter hiding beneath the roar of the windstorm. I listened, and my pencil began to move across the paper. Short dash, long dash, pause, 2 short dashes, Morse code, but it was incredibly fast, compressed into a microburst transmission that lasted less than 0.3 of a second. To Thornwell's digital algorithms, which were searching for modern encrypted packet data or satellite uplinks, this microburst was simply a spike of atmospheric interference. The computers dismissed it because it was too primitive, it was analog, it was dirty. But I recognized the signature immediately. Soviet-era intelligence protocol, a dead-drop pulse transmission. Operatives operating behind enemy lines during the Cold War used it to ping their handlers without leaving a traceable signal footprint. You record the message, compress it, wait for a natural chaotic event like a severe windstorm, and transmit it on an ultra-low frequency for a fraction of a second. The environment masked the signal. Someone was out there. Someone had been operating inside the perimeter of Outpost Sentinel, and they were using tradecraft that hadn't been relevant since the Berlin Wall fell. I spent the next 6 hours hunting. I abandoned the chronological order of the tapes, began pulling specifically from Grid Sector 7 and the surrounding canyons. I looked for the dates of severe weather events, high winds, thunderstorms, barometric drops. I found the stutter again on tape 450, then again on tape 512. Each time the transmission was identical. Each time it occurred moving progressively closer to the facility's primary communications trunk line. I began translating the Morse. It was encrypted using a one-time pad cipher, a mathematical system that is theoretically unbreakable if you don't have the key. But I didn't need to read the content of the message. I was reading the behavior. The transmissions weren't reports. They were range-finding pings. I pulled down a massive physical map of the Mojave from a shelf, unrolled it over the console, took a red grease pencil, began marking the locations of the compromised microphones where I'd found the signal. When I connected the red dots, a cold, undeniable reality materialized on the paper. The intruder wasn't wandering. They were moving with precise, tactical purpose. They were exploiting the microscopic blind spots in Thornwell's digital radar, navigating the canyons using old-school tradecraft. Moving like a ghost, I stared at the map. The trajectory of the red dots converged on a single point. It wasn't the main gate, it wasn't the armory, it was a narrow, steep ravine 3 miles south of the base. An area deemed completely inaccessible by Thornwell's computers. But I knew the terrain. I knew that at the bottom of that ravine ran the main hardline fiber optic and power conduits that fed the entire facility. The intruder wasn't trying to sneak into the base. They were maneuvering to blind it and potentially destroy it from the outside. This wasn't a scavenger. This was a highly trained saboteur. Given the Soviet-era tradecraft, it was someone who had learned their skills in the brutal, unforgiving theaters of Eastern Europe, an old dog fighting a new war, a phantom. I did not panic. I did not rush to the telephone to call the general. Thornwell would demand digital proof, and all I had was a graphite pencil, a piece of yellow paper, and the unwavering certainty of my own instincts. Thornwell's arrogance would blind him to the truth until the base was burning. I needed to handle this the way I'd been trained. Slowly, methodically, I stopped the tape machine. The heavy reels spun to a halt, plunging the bunker into absolute silence. I took off the headphones, laid them gently on the console, picked up the red grease pencil, stared at the final destination point on the map, drew a thick, heavy circle around the ravine. The punishment was over. The hunt had begun. I turned off the green fluorescent lights, left the tapes in the dark, and began the long climb up the concrete stairs. I had to find Flint. We needed to prep the M24. It was time to go back to work. I didn't knock when I entered the Tactical Operations Center. The Tiasket Outpost Sentinel was General Thornwell's cathedral, a cavernous room built beneath a dome of reinforced concrete. Bathed in the icy blue glow of a dozen massive cathode ray tube monitors, the air inside was artificially chilled, smelling heavily of freon, electrified copper, and the bitter scent of stale black coffee. A dozen technicians in starched uniforms sat at elevated consoles, their faces illuminated by the scrolling green text of early digital networks and prototype global positioning data. The room hummed, a constant, self-important vibration of server racks processing millions of bytes of data per second. Thornwell stood at the center, leaning over a digital plotting table that displayed a wireframe map of the Mojave Basin. He was speaking in low, confident tones to his executive officer when I walked past the armed guards at the blast doors. Flint walked 2 paces behind me, carrying nothing but a rolled-up topographic map tube and a worn leather notebook. I'd bypassed the chain of command, didn't stop at the desk of the watch officer, walked directly to the center of the room, to the glowing digital table, and dropped a single sheet of yellow legal paper on top of the reinforced glass. The paper was covered in handwritten Morse code transcriptions, mathematical calculations done in graphite pencil, and a hand-drawn triangulation grid. The hum of conversation in the TOC died instantly. Technicians turned in their chairs. Thornwell slowly raised his head, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto me. The muscles in his jaw tightened. "Captain Graves." His voice dropped into a dangerous, quiet register. "You've broken containment, you've bypassed 3 levels of security, and you're interrupting a live tactical briefing. You'd better have a fire to report." I met his eyes. "I do, General. You have an intruder inside the perimeter grid. Sector 7, grid coordinate 49er Alpha. He's moving toward the primary fiber optic trunk line." Thornwell stared at me for a long moment, then looked down at the crumpled yellow paper resting on his $1 million digital interface. He let out a short, dismissive breath. "An intruder." He repeated the word slowly, looking up at his executive officer, sharing a look of profound condescension. He reached out, tapped the glass of the digital table. "Captain Graves, you're standing in the most advanced sensor array on the North American continent. We're currently tracking a flock of turkey vultures circling 3 miles away. We're monitoring the seismic vibrations of a freight train 50 miles from here. If there was a man in Sector 7, my computers would have categorized his heartbeat 20 minutes ago. I didn't flinch. Your computers are looking for digital emissions, sir. Packet data. Encrypted satellite uplinks. The intruder is not broadcasting in binary. He's using an analog microburst transmitter. Soviet-era intelligence protocol. He's hiding his signal footprint inside severe weather anomalies. Thornwell stood up straight, crossed his arms over his chest, Soviet-era protocol, in the Mojave Desert in 1991. Captain, the Berlin Wall fell 2 years ago. The Cold War is over. You're chasing ghosts in the static because you refuse to accept that your skills are obsolete. Flint spoke up from behind me, his voice gravel and old iron. With respect, General. A ghost is exactly what you should be worried about, the tactics she's describing. I've seen them. East Berlin, 1976. It's KGB dead drop tradecraft. You don't use it unless you're trying to stay entirely invisible to an automated sweep. Thornwell turned his glare onto the older man, Master Sergeant Donovan. You're a relic of a bygone era. I respect your service, but your war is over. We don't fight with compasses and trench coats anymore. He turned to the lead radar technician, Lieutenant. Do we have any anomalies in Sector 7? The young officer typed furiously on his keyboard. The giant screen at the front of the room zoomed in on the jagged topography of Sector 7. Negative, General. Thermal is clear. Seismic is baseline. Radio frequency spectrum is empty. Thornwell pointed at the screen. There's your answer, Captain. Data. Hard. Indisputable digital data. Suddenly, a different console chirped. A sharp, high-pitched alarm. A red icon flashed on the secondary monitor. General, another technician called out, his voice spiking with adrenaline. I have a contact, but it's not in Sector 7. It's in Grid Sector 3, 10 miles north of her coordinates. Thornwell marched over to the console. What are we looking at? High-frequency burst transmission, sir. Encrypted digital packet. It just bounced off a commercial relay satellite. The computer isolated the source. It's coming from a stationary position deep inside the slot canyon known as Devil's Canyon. Thornwell turned back to me. A triumphant, mocking smile spreading across his face. You see, Captain, that is what a real threat looks like. Not a pencil scratching on yellow paper, an encrypted digital transmission. Whoever is out there just made a mistake, and my grid caught them. I stared at the red blinking light on the screen, closed my eyes for 2 seconds, letting my mind run through the variables. The microbursts I'd found on the tapes were incredibly disciplined, the work of a phantom, a professional who moved strictly in the analog shadows. A professional like that does not suddenly switch to a high-frequency digital transmission that lights up a modern radar screen like a flare. I opened my eyes. It's a decoy, General. He knows your system looks for digital spikes. He planted a repeater in Sector 3 to draw your attention away from Sector 7. Enough! Thornwell's voice cracked like a whip. His patience finally snapping. I will not have my intelligence apparatus second-guessed by a soldier who works with a tape recorder. You are dismissed, Captain, both of you. Return to the sub-level before I have you brought up on charges of insubordination. He didn't wait for us to leave. Turn to his executive officer. Scramble the quick reaction force. Platoon strength. Load them into the Blackhawks. I want a hard perimeter established around Devil's Canyon within 15 minutes. We're going to capture this intruder, and we're going to do it by the book. I stood my ground for 1 more second, looked at the digital map, at the red dot blinking in the north, then down at my handwritten yellow paper pointing south. I knew, with the absolute cold certainty of a hunter, that the men Thornwell was sending into that canyon were flying into a trap. Flint put a heavy hand on my shoulder. The unspoken message was clear. We'd done all we could within the chain of command. The chain was broken. I turned, walked out of the TOC. The air outside the concrete bunker was a brutal wall of dry heat. The Mojave sun beat down on the tarmac, baking the asphalt until it radiated in shimmering waves. In the distance, the heavy thumping rhythm of helicopter rotors began to chop through the thick air. 2 UH-60 Blackhawks lifted off from the flight line, banking hard to the north, carrying 30 heavily armed men toward Devil's Canyon. I stood in the shadow of the command building, watching the helicopters shrink into black dots against the blinding blue sky. Flint stood beside me, struck a match against the concrete wall, lit a crumpled cigarette. He's sending them into a kill box. His voice was quiet, matter of fact. The Phantom is not in Sector 3. I watched the horizon. He's in Sector 7. He wanted the base cleared of the quick reaction force. Flint took a drag. The cherry of the cigarette glowed bright orange. If he's an old-school saboteur, he's not just going to hide. He's going to blind the eye that's looking for him. I turned my gaze toward the massive array of microwave communication dishes and radar domes perched on the ridge above the base. 10 minutes later, the base sirens began to wail. It wasn't a gradual failure, it was instantaneous. The low, omnipresent hum of the base's massive diesel generators suddenly, violently choked, and died. The industrial air conditioning units shuddered to a halt. Flint and I rushed back through the heavy doors, moving toward the TOC. Inside the command center, the scene was one of absolute, terrifying chaos. The icy blue glow of the CRT monitors had vanished. Every single screen in the room was dead, replaced by a rolling, hissing sea of gray static. The digital plotting table was a black pane of useless glass. The emergency red lighting kicked on, casting long, bloody shadows across the panicked faces of the technicians. General Thornwell was standing by the primary communications console, his immaculate uniform now clinging to his sweating shoulders. He was shouting at a technician who was frantically twisting dials on a dead radio. "Get them back. Switch to the backup frequencies. Use the satellite relay," his voice roared, the panic bleeding through his authoritative facade. "I can't, General," the technician shouted back. Tearing off his headset, "There is no frequency. The entire electromagnetic spectrum is jammed. It's a broadband electromagnetic pulse, localized but massive. It's wiping out everything: radar, GPS, VHF, UHF. We have zero telemetry. What about the Blackhawks? What about the QRF?" Thornwell demanded. "They were entering the canyon when the jamming hit," the executive officer said, his face pale in the red light. "Sir, their avionics rely on the digital grid for navigation in that narrow airspace. If their screens went dark, a burst of heavily distorted." Screaming static suddenly broke through the primary radio speaker. It was barely intelligible, buried under a mountain of electronic noise, but the terror in the voice was unmistakable. "Taking heavy fire, repeat, taking heavy, Corrichus is unknown. Systems are down. RPGs from the ridge trapped in the canyon need immediate extraction." The transmission cut out in a violent hiss of white noise. The TOC descended into a stunned, horrified silence. The 30 men Thornwell had sent into Devil's Canyon were blind, deaf, and pinned down by an enemy who had orchestrated the entire scenario. The impenetrable digital fortress had been brought to its knees by a single, perfectly placed analog jammer. Thornwell stared at the dead screens. His hands were trembling slightly. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the room. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the terrifying realization that his million-dollar machines could not save his men. I didn't wait for him to speak. I didn't ask for permission. I turned, walked out of the TOC. Flint followed me, throwing his cigarette onto the concrete floor, crushing it beneath his boot. We moved with a silent, terrifying purpose, the purpose of predators who had just caught a scent. We bypassed the panicked soldiers running through the corridors, headed straight for the armory. The armory was dark, lit only by the faint ambient light bleeding through the reinforced windows. The electronic locks on the weapons cages were dead, due to the power failure. I didn't hesitate, walked to the emergency fire axe mounted on the wall, shattered the glass with my elbow, pulled the heavy steel axe, and swung it with brutal, precise force into the locking mechanism of my designated cage. The metal shattered. I pulled the heavy iron door open. There was no time for standard issue protocols. There was no time to wait for the technicians to reboot the computers. Out there in the Mojave, men were dying because a commander had trusted a screen over human instinct. I reached into the rack, pulled out the M24 sniper weapon system. The heavy barrel was cold. The fiberglass stock felt familiar, an extension of my own nervous system. I grabbed 3 10-round magazines of match-grade 7, 62mm ammunition, slammed the first one into the magazine well with a sharp, decisive crack, racked the bolt, chambering the first round. Engaged the safety, slung the rifle over my shoulder, grabbed a heavy canvas rucksack across the room. Flint was not looking for batteries or radios, he was packing survival. He pulled down 2 heavy plastic canteens, filled them from the emergency water drum, grabbed a map case containing a purely topographical paper map of the Mojave Basin, printed with elevation contour lines and magnetic declination warnings. Finally, he reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a heavy brass lensatic military compass, opened the lid, checked the glowing tritium dial. The needle floated freely, pointing steadily to magnetic north, entirely unaffected by the electronic warfare raging invisibly through the air. The jammer. Flint's voice was low in the dark armory. If it's blanketing the entire basin, it requires a massive power source. He couldn't move it far. He has to be on elevated terrain near the fiber trunk to maintain the disruption. I tightened the straps of my rucksack. Sector 7. He's sitting on the ridge above Devil's Canyon. He lured the QRF into the canyon, disabled their navigation. and now he's firing down on them from an elevated position. The terrain between here and Sector 7 is impassable for vehicles, Flint noted, slipping the compass back into his pocket. It's entirely broken rock, shale, and dry wash. The digital rovers couldn't map it. That's why Thornwell thought it was secure. We won't use vehicles. I walked toward the door. We stepped out into the blinding glare of the afternoon sun. The heat hit us like a physical blow. The temperature was holding at 112 degrees. The air was so dry, it felt like it was stripping the moisture directly from our lungs. We didn't take a jeep. We didn't take a radio. We left the concrete perimeter of Outpost Sentinel on foot, slipping through a gap in the chain-link fence, and stepped off the map, into the raw, unforgiving wilderness of the Mojave. The transition was immediate. Behind us lay $1 billion of paralyzed military technology. Ahead of us lay millions of years of geological violence. I took the lead, moving with the fluid. Energy-conserving stride. I didn't look at the ground. I read the terrain 300 yards ahead, plotting the path of least resistance through the jagged rock formations and the thick, thorny clusters of creosote bush. Flint followed 3 paces behind, navigating. Every 10 minutes he would stop, raise the brass compass to his eye, shoot an azimuth off a distant peak, and check our bearing against the contour lines of the paper map. We were operating purely on old-school tradecraft, terrain association, dead reckoning, pacing beads, but so the skills that had been honed in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia and the frozen forests of Europe. Skills that did not require a satellite to function. For 2 hours, we moved in absolute silence. The heat was a living enemy. It baked through the soles of our boots. The sweat evaporated from our skin the moment it formed. Leaving behind a fine crust of white salt, the silence of the desert was profound, broken only by the crunch of our boots on gravel and the dry, rattling hiss of the wind through the sagebrush. As we crested a steep ridge of red sandstone, Flint held up a closed fist. I immediately dropped to a knee. The M24 coming up to my shoulder in one fluid motion, my eye pressing against the optic. "Listen," Flint whispered, crouching beside me. I held my breath, beneath the sound of the wind. Carried on the thermals rising from the basin came the faint, rhythmic popping of automatic gunfire. It was distant, muffled by the rock walls, but it was sustained AK pattern. Flint muttered, recognizing the distinct acoustic signature of the Soviet-designed weapon. "Slow rate of fire. He's not spraying. He's picking them off." "Distance?" I asked, my eyes still in the scope. Scanning the horizon, Flint pulled out the map, laid it on the hot rock, checked his compass. The sound is echoing off the canyon walls, but based on the delay in our current position. He's on the western rim of Devil's Canyon, 2 miles out. We pushed forward, the urgency increasing our pace. The terrain grew more treacherous. The ground fell away into steep, crumbling ravines. We had to scramble up sheer rock faces, our hands cut by the sharp edges of the shale. An hour later, the sun began to dip toward the western horizon. Casting long, stretching shadows across the desert floor, the sky turned a bruised, violent shade of purple and orange. The temperature began to drop rapidly, the heat escaping into the thin atmosphere. We reached the final ridgeline overlooking Devil's Canyon. I crawled the last 50 yards on my stomach, pressing myself flat against the hot stone. My movements slow and deliberate to avoid kicking up any dust. I slid into a narrow crevice between 2 large boulders, creating a natural, shadowed hide, deployed the bipod legs of the M24. Settling the rifle into the dirt, Flint slid in beside me, unrolling a canvas mat. He pulled out a heavy, high-magnification spotting scope, entirely optical, requiring no power below us. Devil's Canyon split the earth open. It was a massive, winding gorge, a mile across, with sheer vertical walls dropping 300 feet down to a dry riverbed. Through my rifle scope, I saw the wreckage of Thornwell's Pride. A Black Hawk helicopter was down on the canyon floor, its tail rotor sheared off against a rock wall. Thick column of black smoke billowed from the engine cowling, rising straight up into the still evening air. The commandos were scattered among the boulders around the crash site, pinned down. They were firing blindly up at the canyon rim, wasting ammunition. Without their radios, they could not coordinate fire. Without their GPS, they did not know where the enemy was. They were terrified, isolated, and bleeding. Among them, I recognized a face, Sergeant Liam Cross, 22 years old, dark hair, square jaw. His father had been Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Cross, killed alongside my father in 1978. The same radar malfunction, the same training accident. 2 families destroyed by the same machine failure. I'd promised myself I would never let that happen again. "I see him," Flint whispered, his voice incredibly calm, the tone of a man who had done this 100 times before. I did not move my rifle. I waited for the data. Reference the main crash site, follow the smoke column straight up to the western rim. Look for the jagged rock formation shaped like an anvil. I traversed the heavy barrel of the rifle a fraction of an inch to the left. The magnified optic swept over the canyon wall. I found the anvil-shaped rock. Target acquired. Through the scope, the Phantom was finally visible. He was not a heavily armored super soldier. He was a man, wearing dust-covered civilian clothes, blending perfectly with the rock. He was prone behind a heavy, tripod-mounted Soviet PKM machine gun. Beside him sat a bulky, metallic box with a thick antenna protruding from the top, the broadband jammer that was choking the entire sector. He was methodical. He would wait for a commando to break cover, to move toward a wounded man, and then he would fire a short. 3-round burst. He was not trying to kill them all at once. He was torturing them, making a point. Distance. I requested. My voice devoid of anger, devoid of fear. It was the voice of a biological calculator. Flint looked away from the scope. Looking down at his paper map, he checked the contour lines, looked back at the target. Estimating the size of the man relative to the reticle in his scope, there was no laser to bounce off the target. There was only mathematics and experience. Range is 1,940 yards, 1.1 miles. It was a staggering distance for an M24 firing a 7.62mm round. It was considered far beyond the weapon's maximum effective range. At that distance, the bullet would be in the air for nearly 3 seconds. It would drop over 100 feet in elevation before it reached the target. Elevation hold, I said, my hands moving to the turrets on my scope, waiting for the numbers. Dial up 42 minutes of angle, Flint instructed. I reached up, turned the elevation dial. The mechanical clicks were loud in the quiet hide. Click, click, click. I dialed the massive drop into the optic, aiming the barrel of the rifle significantly higher than the target. At this distance, the rifle was acting more like artillery than a direct-fire weapon. Wind, I said. This was the impossible variable. The canyon was a massive wind tunnel. The air cooling on the surface was rushing down into the hot canyon, creating violent, unpredictable thermal updrafts and crosswinds. The computers back at the base would have required a dozen sensors to map the wind vectors. Flint did not look at a computer. He looked at the world. He looked at the column of black smoke rising from the downed helicopter, watched how it drifted slightly to the left. Then suddenly sheared hard to the right as it hit an invisible current of air higher up. He looked at the heat mirage dancing off the rocks near the target. Reading the speed and direction of the optical distortion, he picked up a handful of dry dust, let it sift through his fingers, watching it blow back over his shoulder. He was reading the invisible rivers of air. We have a complex wind system. Surface wind is at our back, 3 miles per hour, mid-flight over the canyon void. You have a full-value crosswind pushing right to left at 12 miles per hour at the target. The mirage shows a thermal updraft. It's going to push the bullet up and left. I absorbed the data. I did not write it down. I built a 3-dimensional model of the bullet's flight path in my mind. A curving, dropping arc through a chaotic, invisible ocean. Windage hold. I requested hold left edge of the target, dial right 3 minutes of angle. I made the mechanical adjustments. The crosshairs in my scope were no longer resting on the Phantom. They were resting on a patch of empty rock, high and to the right of his position. I had to trust that the wind and gravity would carry the bullet to the flesh. I settled my cheek against the stock, controlled my breathing. Inhale, exhale, pause, my heart rate slowed. The world outside the scope ceased to exist, down in the canyon. The Phantom stopped firing. He reached down, picked up a canteen, unscrewed the cap. He was relaxed. He believed he was a god sitting above the chaos, untouchable, invisible. He is static, I whispered. Flint replied. Send it. My finger pressed against the trigger. It broke with the crisp snap of a glass rod. The rifle roared, bucking violently against my shoulder. A massive gout of dust and muzzle flash erupted from the rock crevice. The heavy 175-grain bullet left the muzzle at 2,600 feet per second. It tore through the thin desert air. I immediately worked the bolt, ejecting the smoking brass casing. Chambering a fresh round, I did not look away from the scope. For 2.8 seconds, the Mojave Desert was entirely silent. The commandos below stopped moving. The Phantom held his canteen halfway to his mouth. Then, the bullet arrived, through the high magnification scope. I watched the physics play out. The bullet dropped perfectly into the sight picture. Curving slightly under the pressure of the canyon wind, it struck the Phantom dead center in the chest. With devastating kinetic energy, the impact threw him violently backward off his position. He crumpled onto the hard rock and did not move. The tripod-mounted machine gun sat silent. Impact, Flint whispered, his eyes still pressed to the spotting scope. Target is down. No movement. I kept my crosshairs locked on the fallen figure, my finger still resting lightly on the trigger. A seasoned sniper never assumes a kill without confirmation. The sun was setting now. The desert sky transitioning from bruised purple into deep, absolute black. 2 minutes passed. Then, the wind carried a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a mechanical grinding hum. A surge of raw electrical power down in Devil's Canyon. The faint static of the jammer did not fade. It spiked, returning with a violent wave of thick, impenetrable white noise. "Look at the target area," Flint commanded, his voice tight. I pressed my eye harder against the optic. The shadows in the canyon were lengthening into deep pools of ink. I found the anvil-shaped rock. The body was gone. In the place where the phantom had fallen, there was only a discarded heavy canvas vest. Even through the scope, I could see the thick, rectangular outlines of Soviet-era titanium trauma plates. The bullet had struck dead center, shattering the plate, undoubtedly breaking ribs. But the armor had held. The phantom had played dead. Waited for us to lower our guard, and then crawled back to his machine gun. A sudden, brilliant flash of light erupted from the canyon rim, less than a second later. The supersonic crack of a bullet whipped directly over my head, followed immediately by the heavy, thudding boom of the PKM machine gun. The phantom was firing back. He did not know our exact location, but he had seen the muzzle flash of my rifle in the fading light. He was walking a wall of lead up the ridgeline, suppressing the entire area. Rock chips and lethal shards of stone exploded around us. "Keep your head down," Flint said, not flinching as a bullet shattered a boulder 3 feet to his left. "He's firing blind, but he's got 1,000 rounds linked." I kept my eye glued to the scope, searching for a target, but the phantom was a master of his craft. He knew he was exposed to a superior marksman. He was not going to give me a second chance. Down by the anvil rock, 3 distinct metallic pops echoed over the gunfire. Thick, roiling clouds of dense, gray smoke began to billow from the canyon rim. It was not standard concealment smoke. It burned with a fierce, unnatural chemical intensity, hexachloroethane, military-grade obscuration. Within seconds, a massive, impenetrable wall of gray fog blanketed the entire western edge of Devil's Canyon. It was 50 feet high and 100 yards wide, entirely swallowing the phantom. The machine gun and the jammer. The gunfire ceased. The phantom was relocating inside the smoke, setting up for a final, decisive strike on the helpless commandos below. Secure in the knowledge that no sniper on Earth could hit what they could not see. "I have 0 visibility," Flint said, his spotting scope useless against the chemical fog. "Thermal imaging can't penetrate that compound. Laser rangefinders will scatter. He has completely blinded the battle space." I stared into the gray void. The computers back at Outpost Sentinel would have given up. Without a digital signature, without a thermal bloom, without a radar cross-section, the target simply did not exist. General Thornwell's philosophy stated that if the machine could not see it, it could not be killed. But I did not rely on machines. I relied on the human mind. "He is a creature of habit," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the wind. "He relies on Soviet doctrine, predictable intervals, predictable spacing." I closed my eyes, stopped looking at the smoke, and started listening to my memory. I went back to the dark. Windowless bunker of sublevel 3. I remembered the thousands of hours of magnetic tape. I remembered the tiny, microscopic stutter of his transmissions. Click, clack, click. It was a rhythm, a cadence. The phantom moved to a specific internal metronome. I had mapped his movements through the audio files. I knew how long it took him to break down a piece of equipment. "Move 5 yards. And set it up again." I heard my father's voice, from a memory from when I was 12 years old, sitting on the hood of his truck in the Nevada Badlands. Staring up at the infinite black sky, he said, "When you can't see, Sienna, trust the pattern. Everything repeats. The stars, the wind, the enemy. Find the rhythm, and you'll find the target." "Flint," I said, my eyes still closed, my hands resting lightly on the stock auto rifle. "Read the smoke." Flint did not question me. He looked through his spotting scope, shifting his focus away from the ground and up toward the top of the smoke plume. "The smoke is acting as a wind indicator. It's hitting the crosswind at 30 feet. The column is bending right to left, 6 miles per hour, constant, no gusts. I did the math. I factored in the drop. I factored in the spin drift of the bullet. I factored in the Coriolis effect of the rotating Earth. I was calculating a firing solution for a ghost hidden behind a wall of solid gray, based entirely on a psychological profile built from the static of a tape recorder. He fired from the center of the anvil rock. I murmured, visualizing the terrain behind the smoke. "He popped the smoke. He knows a sniper will aim at the center of the cloud. Standard evasion doctrine dictates he will crawl laterally. He favors his right side. His transmission sights always had the antenna rigged to the right of his hide. I opened my eyes. The crosshairs of my scope rested on the impenetrable gray wall. I moved the barrel 3 millimeters to the left. I aimed at absolutely nothing, just an empty patch of drifting fog. He will move exactly 10 yards from his original position. He will take 12 seconds to drag the machine gun. He will take 3 seconds to mount it on the bipod. He will take 2 seconds to acquire his target. My voice dropped into a flat, deadly monotone. I began to count in my head, a slow, perfect internal clock. 1, 2, 3, down in the canyon. The commandos were bracing for the end. They could hear the heavy metal clanking of the machine gun being dragged across the rocks somewhere above them. They were blind. They were helpless. 10, 11, 12, my finger tightened against the curved steel of the trigger. I had pulled all the slack out of the mechanism. The sear was resting on a hair trigger edge. 13, 14, he is on the gun. I whispered. 15, I fired. The blast shattered the silence of the ridgeline. The heavy rifle kicked back into my shoulder. The brass casing flew through the air. Glinting in the faint moonlight, the bullet tore across the canyon void. It hit the wall of chemical smoke and vanished into the gray mist. For 3 long seconds, there was nothing, just the sound of the wind tearing across the desert floor. Then, from deep within the smoke cloud, came a sound that had nothing to do with machinery. It was the heavy, unmistakable sound of a solid metallic impact, followed by the clatter of a heavy steel weapon falling against hard rock. I cycled the bolt, kept my crosshairs locked on the empty gray space. I waited. Flint kept his eye on the scope. A minute passed. Then 2, slowly. The wind began to shred the chemical smoke. The edges of the cloud frayed, tearing apart into long, gray ribbons that drifted down into the canyon. The anvil rock began to emerge from the haze. As the smoke cleared, the reality of the shot was revealed. The phantom lay motionless against the rock face. The heavy PKM machine gun was tipped over beside him. He had crawled exactly 10 yards to the left. He had mounted the gun exactly where I had predicted. And he had caught a 175-grain hollow point bullet perfectly through the side of the neck, completely bypassing the heavy titanium armor plates on his chest and back. The ghost was dead, down below. The green light on the broadband jammer finally flickered, sputtered, and died for the last time. The radio on my chest rig, dead for the last hour, suddenly crackled to life. It was flooded with the frantic, overlapping voices of the Quick Reaction Force. Outpost Sentinel, this is QRF Actual. The jamming has ceased. I repeat, the jamming has ceased. We have clear skies, requesting immediate medical evacuation. We have wounded. Copy that, QRF. Medevac is inbound. Be advised, radar shows no movement on the canyon rim. The threat appears to be neutralized. Do you have eyes on? Negative, Echo. We didn't do it. Someone else took him out. Someone on the high ground. I reached down, turned off the radio on my chest. I did not need recognition. I did not need praise. The mission was complete. I stood up, my muscles aching from the tension in the cold desert air. I began to break down the M24, unscrewing the heavy optic, collapsing the bipods, sliding the components into my canvas rucksack. Flint packed away his map and his compass. He looked at me. In the fading light, I did not look like a soldier who had just pulled off one of the most mathematically impossible sniper shots in the history of modern warfare. I simply looked tired. That was a hell of a wind call, Captain, Flint said quietly. It was the highest praise he could offer. A spotter and a sniper shared a bond that went deeper than blood. It was a bond forged in absolute trust. We had a good map, Flint, I replied, lifting the heavy rucksack onto my shoulders. We turned our backs on Devil's Canyon and began the long walk home. The journey back to Outpost Sentinel took 4 hours. 4 hours of navigating by starlight. 4 hours of walking in silence through the freezing desert night. Because the Mojave doesn't just punish you with heat, it punishes you with cold. The temperature had dropped from 112 degrees to 42 in less than 3 hours. The desert doesn't retain warmth. It bleeds it into the thin atmosphere the moment the sun disappears. My boots crunched on the gravel, each step a small explosion of sound in the vast silence. Flint walked 3 paces behind me, his breathing steady, controlled, the rhythm of a man who had done this walk 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different deserts, under 1,000 different stars. I didn't need a compass now. I navigated by Ursa Major, by Polaris, by the same constellations my father had taught me when I was 12 years old. Sitting on the hood of his truck in the Nevada Badlands, pointing up at the infinite black, when the machines fail, baby girl, when the power goes out and the screens go dark. Look up. The stars don't lie. They've been guiding people home for 10,000 years. I looked up now, and I let them guide me home. We crested the final ridge overlooking the basin just after midnight. Outpost Sentinel appeared below us, a glittering technological oasis in the Black Desert. The massive diesel generators had been restarted. The base was flooded with harsh, artificial white light. The radar domes were spinning again, endlessly searching the sky for threats that had already been eliminated by 2 people carrying a map and a rifle. The flight line was buzzing with activity. 4 Black Hawk helicopters sat on the tarmac, their rotors spinning lazily as medical crews rushed wounded commandos from the canyon toward the base hospital. I could see the stretchers, the blood-soaked bandages, the faces twisted in pain, but they were alive, 30 men. Who would have died if I had listened to General Thornwell? We walked down the final slope, slipped through the same gap in the chain-link fence we had used to exit, and stepped back onto the illuminated tarmac. We didn't try to hide. We walked directly across the flight line toward the armory, covered in a thick layer of white desert dust, our uniforms torn from the rocks. We looked like apparitions, returning from a forgotten war. We made it halfway across the tarmac. Then, a piercing beam of spotlight hit us, blindingly bright. Halt! Do not move. Keep your hands where we can see them. A squad of heavily armed military police soldiers surrounded us, their M16 rifles raised, pointed directly at my chest, at Flint's head. The MPs looked nervous, their eyes darting between the 2 exhausted snipers standing in the light. A black military utility vehicle screeched to a halt behind the MPs. The door flew open. General Marcus Thornwell stepped out into the harsh light. He was livid, his uniform was rumpled, his face flushed with a mixture of profound embarrassment and pure, unadulterated rage, his perfect $1 million digital defense grid had failed spectacularly, nearly resulting in the massacre of 30 American soldiers. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for the catastrophic breakdown of his command. And standing before him was a captain who had openly defied him, broken into an armory, and vanished into the desert during a base-wide crisis. Disarm them, Thornwell barked at the MPs. 2 MPs stepped forward, cautiously stripping the M24 from my back. Taking Flint's sidearm, I did not resist. I stood perfectly still, my face an unreadable mask of absolute stoicism. Thornwell marched forward, stopping mere inches from my face. Captain Sienna Graves, you are under arrest. You will be charged with insubordination, destruction of government property, unauthorized deployment of a weapon system, desertion of your post during a combat emergency. His voice trembled with fury. I am going to see you court-martialed. I am going to see you spend the next 20 years in Leavenworth. Flint spoke up, his voice a low, warning rumble. General, you might want to check the canyon rim before you start writing charges. She just saved your entire quick reaction force. Silence! Thornwell roared, pointing a finger at Flint's chest. You are an accomplice, Donovan. You are a dinosaur who should have been put out to pasture a decade ago. I don't care what you did out there. You operated outside the chain of command. You acted like rogue mercenaries on my installation. He stepped back, breathing heavily, his pride stinging. He could not physically force me to remove the night owl patch, but he could destroy my career. He could erase what we had done. He could rewrite history. The threat in the canyon was neutralized by the QRF, Thornwell said, his voice dropping into a cold, calculated, and pushing the enemy into a coordinated crossfire. That is the official report. That is what the data will show. He was lying, using his rank to erase our achievement, to protect his own failing career. I looked at him. I did not show anger. I did not show fear. I looked at him with the cold, analytical pity of someone watching a man drown in a puddle of his own making. Take them to the holding cells. Thornwell ordered the MPs, turning his back on us. Throw them in solitary. I don't want them speaking to anyone until the JAG officers arrive tomorrow morning. The MPs reached out to grab my arms. Before they could make contact, a new sound cut through the noise of the tarmac. It was not the high-pitched whine of an Army Black Hawk. It was a deep, concussive, heavy thumping that rattled the teeth in my skull. It was a sound that commanded absolute authority. Everyone on the tarmac, including General Thornwell, looked up at the night sky. Descending from the blackness, entirely without running lights, were 2 massive MH-60M and direct-action penetrator helicopters. They were painted completely flat black. They bore no identifying tail numbers. No unit markings, no American flags. They were ghost ships. The helicopters flared hard. The sheer force of their rotor wash kicked up a massive sandstorm on the tarmac, forcing the MPs to shield their eyes and step back. The aircraft touched down with heavy, synchronized precision, directly between Thornwell and the holding facility, before the rotors even began to slow. The side doors slid open. A team of men stepped out. They were not wearing standard military uniforms. They wore sterile, unmarked tactical gear over civilian clothing. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency that made the base military police look like untrained recruits. They immediately formed a protective perimeter around the lead helicopter. From the dark interior of the cabin, an older woman stepped down onto the tarmac. She was wearing the Class A dress uniform of the United States Army. The uniform was immaculate. On her shoulders sat two heavy silver stars. A major general, but it was not her rank that made Thornwell's blood run cold. It was the insignia on her left breast pocket, a small, subdued shield bearing the seal of the Department of Defense, flanked by the emblem of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This woman was not a field commander. She was a creature of the Pentagon. She was a woman who lived in the absolute highest, most classified echelons of military intelligence. The two-star general walked directly toward Thornwell. The sterile operators parted silently to let her through. Thornwell snapped to attention, executing a sharp, nervous salute. "General, ma'am, welcome to Outpost Sentinel. We have just experienced a localized security incident, but the situation is under control. I have the perpetrators in custody." The Major General did not return the salute. She did not even look at Thornwell. She walked past the Brigadier General, walked right through the circle of nervous military police, and stopped in front of me. I snapped to attention. Flint did the same. The Major General looked at the dust covering my uniform, looked at the exhausted lines on my face, then looked down at the night owl patch stitched to my shoulder. "Stand at ease, Captain Graves." Her voice was quiet, but it carried the immense, crushing weight of absolute authority. I relaxed my stance. The Major General finally turned to look at Thornwell. "General Thornwell, tell me why my chief field operative is currently being held at gunpoint by your security personnel." Thornwell blinked, his mind struggling to process the words, Your operative, ma'am?" "Captain Graves is a communications technician assigned to the testing pool. She is currently under arrest for insubordination and stealing a weapon system from my armory." The Major General reached into the breast pocket of her uniform jacket, pulled out a single sheet of heavy, watermark paper, unfolded it slowly. "Captain Sienna Graves," she read aloud, her voice echoing across the silent tarmac, "is a Tier 1 asset assigned to Task Force Night Owl, a highly classified direct action intelligence unit operating under the sole authority of the Secretary of Defense." She looked up at Thornwell. "She was embedded in your facility not to test your equipment, General Thornwell, but to test your vulnerabilities." Thornwell's face drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. "We knew there was a leak in this sector," the Major General continued, stepping closer to Thornwell. "We suspected a foreign intelligence asset was operating in the Mojave, probing the perimeter of our next-generation defense grids. We placed Captain Graves here to find him, because we knew your multi-million-dollar computers would never see a ghost operating in the analog shadows." The Major General turned to her aide, a severe-looking woman in a suit holding a heavy briefcase. The aide opened the briefcase, pulled out a portable cassette player, pressed play. Out of the small speaker came the harsh, crackling sound of wind, followed by a microscopic mechanical stutter. Click, clack, click. "Captain Graves identified the threat using 300 feet of magnetic tape and a pencil," the Major General said. "She plotted the enemy's movements while you were busy giving tours to defense contractors, and when your digitized quick reaction force walked blind into a trap that nearly got 30 Americans killed. She bypassed your failed chain of command, hiked into the desert, and eliminated a high-value target from 1.2 miles away in zero visibility conditions." The Major General stepped directly into Thornwell's personal space. "She did not steal a weapon, Thornwell. She utilized a tool to complete a sanctioned Department of Defense objective. You are not going to court-martial her. You are not going to arrest her." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "In fact, General Thornwell, you are going to be relieved of your command, effective immediately, pending a full congressional inquiry into the catastrophic failure of your security grid." The words fell like heavy stones on the tarmac. Thornwell stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The empire he had built, the digitized future he had promised, had been dismantled by a piece of paper and a tape recorder. Your executive officer will assume temporary command of this facility," the Major General said, turning her back on Thornwell. She looked at the base military police who were still holding their rifles awkwardly. "Lower your weapons." The MPs instantly dropped the muzzles of their M16s to the ground, stepping back into the shadows. The Major General looked at me. The secretary sends his regards, Captain Graves. The extraction team will debrief you on the flight back to DC. You did outstanding work. She paused. Thank you, Mildly. The Major General looked over at Flint. And, Master Sergeant Donovan, your file said you retired after Berlin. It seems you still have an eye for the wind. Flint's weathered face remained expressionless, but I saw the faintest glimmer of pride in his eyes. The wind doesn't change, General, just the people standing in it. The Major General nodded respectfully. The tension on the tarmac had broken, the truth had been revealed, and the natural order of things had been violently, fundamentally restored. General Thornwell stood alone in the center of the tarmac. Surrounded by the ruins of his pride, he looked at me, he looked at the night owl patch on my shoulder, the patch he had mocked, the patch he had ordered me to remove. He realized now what it represented. It did not represent rebellion, it represented a level of lethal, silent professionalism that he would never, in his entire life, achieve. It represented the absolute apex of the American military tradition, a tradition built not on microchips, but on blood, sweat, and unbreakable discipline. Thornwell swallowed hard. The taste of defeat was ash in his mouth. He knew what military protocol demanded. He knew what honor required. Even from a man who had lost his own, he stepped forward. Closing the distance between himself and the woman he had tried to destroy, he stopped 3 paces away from me. He straightened his back. Bringing his boots together, he raised his right hand. His fingers rigidly extended and brought the edge of his hand up to the brim of his cover. In a slow, agonizingly deliberate salute, it was not a salute given to rank. It was a salute given to a superior warrior. It was the ultimate concession. I looked at the defeated general. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply stood at the position of attention, my posture perfect, my face as still and calm as the deep waters of a desert aquifer. I raised my hand and returned the salute. The motion was crisp, precise, and entirely devoid of emotion. Correction achieved, General, I said softly. I dropped my hand, turned on my heel, and walked toward the waiting black helicopter. Flint fell in step beside me, leaving the men of the New World standing silently in the dust. The heavy doors slid shut, the massive rotors pitched, the engines screaming as they grabbed the desert air. I sat down on the cold metal bench inside the helicopter. Flint sat across from me. The Major General sat at the head of the cabin. She handed me a folder. Thick, classified, sealed with red wax. Operation Silent Dawn. We need you in Kandahar in 72 hours. I opened the folder. Photos of mountain terrain, Soviet-era bunkers, topographical maps marked with red circles. Another ghost, another hunt. I looked up at the Major General. Ma'am, permission to speak freely. Granted. How long have you known there was a threat at Outpost Sentinel? The Major General's expression didn't change. 3 months. We intercepted chatter suggesting a Soviet sleeper agent had been activated. We needed someone who could think like they did, someone who understood the old tradecraft. So you sent me into a trap. I sent you into a test. Thornwell's grid was the real target. If it failed against someone operating in the analog shadows, we needed to know. Before we rolled it out across every installation in the continental United States, I closed the folder, and if I hadn't found the signal, then 30 men would have died. Thornwell would have been relieved, and we would have scrapped the entire defense grid. Either way, we got the answer we needed. Cold, calculated, the way the Pentagon always operated. I looked out the small window of the helicopter, watching Outpost Sentinel shrink below us, the lights, the radar domes. The $1 billion of hardware that had been rendered useless by a single man with a jammer and a tripod-mounted machine gun. Flint leaned back against the vibrating wall of the cabin. They're not retiring you, are they? I looked at the folder in my lap. They just get rarer. He nodded slowly. You gonna take the Kandahar mission? I thought about my father, thought about the day he died. Because a machine failed. Thought about Liam Cross, lying in that canyon, bleeding, waiting for someone to save him. Thought about the 30 men who went home to their families tonight because I didn't trust a screen. Yeah, I'm gonna take it. The helicopter banked hard to the east. Climbing rapidly into the star-filled sky, the desert stretched out below us, infinite, black, silent. The Major General stood up, walked to the back of the cabin, returned with 2 steel canteens of water, handed one to me, one to Flint. Drink. You've been in the field for 16 hours. Dehydration kills more operators than bullets. I unscrewed the cap, drank deeply. The water was cold. Clean. Perfect. The Major General sat back down. Captain Graves, I need to ask you something. Ma'am. The second shot. The one through the smoke. You couldn't see the target. You had no thermal, no laser rangefinder, no spotter confirmation. How did you know where he was? I set the canteen down, stared at the floor of the helicopter. I listened to 3 months of his transmissions, ma'am. I mapped every location, every interval, every pattern. He was a professional. Professionals don't deviate, they repeat, because repetition keeps you alive. I looked up. He moved the same way every time. Same distance, same timing, same positioning. I didn't need to see him, I just needed to remember him. The Major General studied my face. Your father taught you that. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. Colonel Robert Graves died 1978. Training accident. Radar malfunction led to friendly fire. She knew everything. Of course she did. That's why you don't rely on machines. I trust them, ma'am. I just don't rely on them. There's a difference. The Major General nodded. Your father would be proud of you, Captain. I felt something tighten in my chest, a knot of emotion I had kept locked down for 13 years. Thank you, ma'am. The helicopter flew in silence for a long time, the hum of the rotors, the vibration of the airframe, the endless black desert below. Flint broke the silence. General. Permission to ask a question? Go ahead, Master Sergeant. What happens to Thornwell? The Major General's face hardened. He'll be reassigned to a desk job at the Pentagon, reviewing procurement contracts for office furniture. His career is over, but he won't face a court-martial. Too much publicity. Too many questions about why we embedded an operative without telling him. So he gets a soft landing. He gets what every failed commander gets. Obscurity, a quiet retirement, and the knowledge that 30 men almost died because he valued data over instinct. Flint nodded, satisfied. I looked out the window again, thought about Thornwell standing alone on that tarmac, surrounded by the wreckage of his pride. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel vindication. I felt something closer to pity because I understood what he had lost. Not his command, not his stars, but his son. Ryan Thornwell, 23 years old, killed by a targeting error. Split-second mistake. By an operator who trusted a computer screen more than his own eyes. Thornwell blamed people after that. Started trusting systems because systems don't grieve, they don't question. They don't hesitate, but they also don't adapt, they don't improvise, they don't listen to the silence. And in the end, that's what killed his career. We landed at a classified airfield outside of Washington, D.C. just before dawn. The sky was the color of bruised plums, fading into pale orange at the horizon. The Major General stepped off the helicopter first. A black SUV was waiting on the tarmac. Captain Graves, Master Sergeant Donovan, you have 48 hours of mandatory stand-down. Get some sleep. See a medic. File your after-action reports. She paused. Then report to Building 7. Pentagon, sublevel 4, 0800 hours, Wednesday. Yes, ma'am. The Major General walked toward the SUV. Then stopped, turned back. Captain, one more thing. Ma'am, the night owl patch. Keep wearing it. You earned it. She got into the SUV. The door closed. The vehicle drove away, leaving me and Flint standing alone on the empty tarmac. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Flint pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes, lit one, took a long drag. You ever think about getting out, Captain? I looked at the sunrise. Every day, Flint. But you don't know why. I thought about my father, thought about Liam Cross, thought about the 30 men who went home. Because someone has to listen when everyone else is looking at a screen. Flint nodded slowly. That's a good answer. We stood in silence, watching the sun climb higher. The world waking up, oblivious to the ghosts who kept them safe in the dark. Come on, Flint, let's go home. Where's home, Captain? I smiled, for the first time in days. Wherever the next mission is, we walked across the tarmac, toward the waiting transport, 2 warriors. In a digital world, still listening, still hunting, still standing the spaces in between. 6 months later, I stood in a small, windowless classroom, deep in the basement of a building that didn't officially exist. 4 women sat at steel desks in front of me. All in their early 20s, all freshly graduated from the Special Operations training pipeline, all wearing the same hungry, determined expression I had worn at their age. On the table in front of me sat an M24 sniper weapon system, disassembled, each component laid out in precise order. This rifle, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the concrete room, belonged to my grandfather. He carried it in Korea. My father carried it in training exercises across the American Southwest. I carried it in the Mojave Desert. Now I'm going to teach you how to use it. I picked up the barrel, held it up to the light. This is not just a weapon, it's a philosophy. It doesn't require batteries, can't be jammed, doesn't broadcast its position. It relies on physics, chemistry, and the steady hand of the operator. I set the barrel down in 3 months. You will learn to shoot at distances most people consider impossible. You will learn to read wind that can't be seen. You will learn to calculate trajectories in your head. Without a computer, without a laser rangefinder. One of the women raised her hand. Captain Graves, Why are we learning these methods when we have digital scopes and ballistic computers? I looked at her. What's your name? Specialist Jade Mercer, ma'am. Jade. Good question. Who here has heard of Outpost Sentinel? No hands went up. Of course not. It was classified 6 months ago. A base in Nevada was attacked. 30 men were pinned down in a canyon. All their digital systems were jammed. Radar, GPS, radio, everything. They were blind, helpless, waiting to die. I paused. 2 people saved them, using a paper map, a brass compass, and this rifle. No satellites, no computers, just skill. Training, and the willingness to trust what they knew instead of what a screen told them. I walked to the front of the room. Technology is a tool. It's an incredible tool. But it's not a replacement for the human mind. Machines fail, networks go down, batteries die when that happens. Your training is all you have. Your instinct is all you have. I picked up a heavy brass compass from my desk. The brass was worn smooth from decades of use. I held it up. This belonged to my father, Colonel Robert Graves. He died because a machine failed, a radar malfunction, friendly fire. He trusted the technology and it killed him. The room was silent. I'm not teaching you to hate technology. I'm teaching you to respect its limitations. I'm teaching you to be the backup plan. When everything else fails, you don't. I walked to Jade's desk, placed the compass in front of her. This is yours now. Take care of it. It'll guide you home when nothing else can. Jade looked at the compass, then up at me. Thank you, ma'am. I nodded. Walked back to the front of the room. All right, let's start with the basics. Rifle maintenance. Jade, you're up. Show me how to clean a barrel. Jade stood up, walked to the table, picked up the cleaning rod. And I watched, the same way my father had watched me, the same way his father had watched him, a chain unbroken. A legacy passed down, not through machines, but through hands, through discipline, through the quiet, patient act of teaching someone to listen, when the world only knows how to look. 3 weeks after I started teaching, the nightmares came back, not every night, but often enough. I would be back in that hide, on that ridge. Staring through the scope at the gray wall of smoke, counting down in my head, 15, 16, 17, except in the dream, when I pulled the trigger, the bullet missed. And I watched through the scope as the Phantom stood up, mounted his machine gun, and opened fire on the canyon below. I watched Liam Cross die. I watched all 30 of them die. Because I trusted a pattern that wasn't there, I would wake up, drenched in sweat, heart hammering, hands shaking. It took me 20 minutes to remember. The shot didn't miss. The men didn't die. I saved them. But the doubt remained, because that's what happens when you make a decision based on instinct instead of data. You never stop wondering, what if I was wrong? What if I got lucky? What if next time the pattern breaks and someone dies? I was in the classroom on a Tuesday morning, teaching Jade and the other 3 recruits how to read mirage, the shimmer of heat rising off hot surfaces, how it distorts your sight picture. How you can use the distortion to measure wind speed at the target. My phone buzzed, I ignored it, kept talking, it buzzed again and again. Jade, take over, show them the mirage drill. I walked to the back of the classroom, pulled out my phone, 7 missed calls, all from the same number. Pentagon switchboard. My stomach dropped, I stepped into the hallway. Called back, Captain Graves, this is Major General Victoria Cross, we have a situation. I need you at Walter Reed Medical Center. Immediately. Ma'am, what kind of situation? Sergeant Liam Cross was admitted 3 hours ago. Severe psychological break. He's asking for you. Specifically. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I'm on my way. Walter Reed Medical Center sits in Bethesda, Maryland, a sprawling complex of white buildings, manicured lawns, and the quiet, efficient hum of military healthcare. I walked through the main entrance. Still wearing my training fatigues, still covered in a fine layer of dust from the range, a nurse at the front desk directed me to the psychiatric ward. 4th floor. East wing, I took the stairs. Because elevators feel like traps when your heart is already racing. The psychiatric ward was different from the rest of the hospital. Quieter, dimmer lighting. Thicker doors, a staff sergeant sat at the nurse's station, looked up when I approached. Captain Graves? Yes. Room 447, end of the hall. Be advised, he's been heavily sedated. But he's lucid, mostly. I walked down the hallway, my boots silent on the polished linoleum, stopped outside room 447. The door was partially open. I knocked softly. Liam? Captain Graves? His voice was hoarse, rough, like he'd been screaming. I pushed the door open. Liam Cross sat on the edge of a hospital bed, wearing a standard issue gown. His left leg was in a brace. His face was gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling slightly. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him, 6 months ago. In the canyon, bleeding, but alive. Hey, Liam! I stepped into the room, closed the door behind me. Hey, Captain. He tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. I pulled a chair over. Sat down across from him. They told me you asked for me. Yeah, I needed to talk to someone who was there, someone who understands. Understands what? He looked down at his hands. I can't sleep, Captain. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that canyon. I hear the helicopters crashing. I hear the gunfire. I feel the blood running down my leg. His voice cracked. I thought I was going to die. We all did. We were blind, deaf, trapped, and that bastard on the ridge was just picking us off, one by one. I leaned forward. But you didn't die, Liam. You made it out. Because of you. He looked up. They told me after that you hiked into the desert, that you took the shot, that you saved us. I did my job. No. His voice suddenly fierce. You did more than that. You broke every rule. You defied a general. You risked your career. For us. For me. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. My dad. He talked about your dad. All the time. Colonel Robert Graves, best officer he ever served with. Saved his life. Twice. I felt that knot tighten in my chest again. I didn't know that. Dad said, if it wasn't for your father, I wouldn't exist. He said, the Graves family, they pay their debts. Liam's hands were shaking harder now. I owe you my life, Captain. And I don't know how to live with that. I reached out, placed my hand over his. Liam, listen to me. You don't owe me anything. Your father saved my father. I saved you. The debt is paid. We're even, but I can't. You can. I squeezed his hand. You're going to heal. You're going to get help. You're going to learn to sleep again. And when you do, you're going to live. You're going to have a family. You're going to tell your kids about the day you almost died in a desert canyon and how you fought and survived. His eyes were wet now. What if I can't, Captain? What if I'm broken? Then you learn to live broken, the same way I did, the same way Flint did, the same way every soldier who's ever seen combat did. I leaned closer. You know what my father used to tell me? What? Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being terrified and doing it anyway. Liam's breathing steadied slightly. Thank you, Captain. Call me Sienna. He blinked. Surprised. Sienna. I stood up. I have to get back to base. But I'm going to give you my number. You call me anytime. Day or night, if the nightmares get bad, if you need to talk. You call. I wrote my number on a piece of paper. Handed it to him. I mean it, Liam. You're not alone. He took the paper. Held it like it was the most valuable thing in the world. I won't forget this. Good. Don't. I walked to the door. Pause, turned back. Liam, one more thing. Yeah, your father would be proud of you. Not because you survived, but because you're still fighting. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out. Let the door close softly behind me, and I stood in that hallway for a long time, trying to hold myself together, because seeing Liam like that, broken, haunted, it reminded me that saving someone's life doesn't always save them. 2 months passed. The training intensified. Night shoots, urban environments, stress tests. I pushed them harder than any instructor had ever pushed me, because I knew the difference between life and death is usually measured in fractions of a second, and I wanted them ready for anything. Jade excelled. She was a natural. Quick mind, steady hands, unshakable focus. She reminded me of myself. At that age, hungry, determined, and terrified of failing, we were on the range one evening, just the two of us. Everyone else had gone to chow. Jade was practicing long-distance shots. 800 yards, she fired, hit center mass, fired again, same result. I watched through my spotting scope. You're pulling left, slightly, anticipating the recoil. She adjusted, fired again. Dead center, better. She lowered the rifle, looked at me. Captain, can I ask you something personal? Depends on the question. Do you ever regret it? Joining. Doing this. I thought about that for a long time. Every day, she blinked. Really? Yeah, every time I hear about someone like Liam, someone who came back broken. Every time I think about the missions I've run, the people I've killed, the people I couldn't save, I regret it. Then why do you stay? I looked out at the range, at the targets, at the vast empty desert beyond, because someone has to. Someone has to be willing to make the hard calls, to take the impossible shots, to stand in the gap when everyone else is looking the other way. I turned back to her, and because, for better or worse, I'm good at it, and if I walked away, someone less capable would take my place, and more people would die. Jade nodded slowly. That's a heavy burden. It is, but it's mine. And I chose it. Do you think I'm choosing it, or is it choosing me? I smiled. Does it matter? She laughed. A short, sharp sound. I guess not. She raised the rifle again. One more shot, before we call it. Make it count. She settled into position, controlled her breathing, fired. The bullet flew across the range, hit the target, dead center. She lowered the rifle, looked at me with a grin. How was that? Perfect. The call came 3 weeks later. Major General Cross again. Captain Graves, we have a situation. Kandahar, high-value target, Soviet-trained, operating out of a cave complex in the mountains. He's been using methods to evade our drones. We need someone who thinks like he does. When do I leave? 48 hours. You'll be briefed en route. And Captain? Ma'am? This one's voluntary. You can say no. I thought about Liam, about Jade, about my father, about the endless cycle of missions, risks, sacrifices. I'll take it. Good. Report to Andrews Air Force Base, Thursday, 0600 hours. She hung up. I sat in my office staring at the phone. 48 hours. I had 48 hours to prepare. To say goodbye, to make peace with the possibility that this might be the mission I don't come back from. I stood up, walked to the classroom. Jade and the others were cleaning their rifles. Listen up. They stopped, looked at me. I'm being deployed. Thursday. I'll be gone for. Undetermined amount of time. Jade's face fell. You're leaving? For now. Master Sergeant Donovan will take over your training. He's the best wind reader I've ever met. You're in good hands. But, Captain, Jade, this is part of the job. You deploy, you come back, you deploy again, you get used to it. I walked to my desk, pulled out the compass, the one I'd given to Jade. She'd left it there after the last training session. I picked it up, walked over to her. Keep this with you. Always. It'll guide you home when nothing else can. She took it. Are you coming back? I looked her in the eye. I don't know. The room went silent, but I'm going to try. Thursday morning, 0530 hours, I stood on the tarmac at Andrews Air Force Base. A C-17 Globemaster sat waiting. Engines idling, ramp down. Flint was already there, leaning against a cargo pallet. Smoking a cigarette, he looked up when I approached. Thought you might try to do this one solo. I thought about it, and I decided I'd rather have someone watching my back who knows what they're doing. He grinned. Smart call. I dropped my gear bag, looked at him. Flint. If this goes bad, it won't, but if it does, then we go down fighting. Same as always. He crushed the cigarette under his boot. Besides, you made a promise to that kid, Liam. You told him you'd teach him to live. You can't do that if you're dead. Fair point. We walked up the ramp. Into the belly of the aircraft. The loadmaster sealed the ramp behind us. The engines roared. The plane began to move. I sat down on the webbed seating, strapped in. Closed my eyes, and I thought about everyone I was leaving behind. Jade, Liam, the other recruits, my father, all the people who had shaped me, taught me, trusted me. I thought about the mission ahead, the cave complex, the Soviet-trained operative, the impossible shot I'd have to make, in the dark, in the cold, in the thin mountain air. And I made a promise to myself I would come back, not because I was invincible, but because I had something to come back to, a legacy to pass on. A next generation to train. The plane lifted off the runway, climbing into the gray morning sky, and I opened my eyes. Ready. 18 days later, the mission was a success. Barely. The Soviet-trained operative, a man named Dmitry Volkov, had been everything the intelligence suggested. Professional, disciplined, deadly. He'd set up in a cave system. 3 miles deep, 11,000 feet elevation, using old communication methods, dead drops, one-time pads, the same tradecraft I'd hunted in the Mojave. It took us 14 days to find him. 2 days to set up the shot, and 1 bullet to end it. Flint and I extracted under cover of darkness, hiked 20 miles to the extraction point, flew back to Kandahar. Then Germany, then home. I walked off the plane at Andrews Air Force Base. Exhausted, filthy, but alive. Jade was waiting at the edge of the tarmac, along with the other recruits. When she saw me, she ran, full sprint, and threw her arms around me. I was so surprised. I almost fell over. Captain, you're back. You're actually back. I hugged her back. Awkwardly, because I'm not good at this. Yeah, I'm back. She pulled away, eyes shining, we thought. When we didn't hear anything for 3 weeks, operational security. No communication during active missions. Right, of course. She wiped her eyes. We've been training every day. Master Sergeant Donovan is terrifying. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Yeah, he is. Flint walked past us, carrying his gear bag. You girls done hugging? I need a shower and a steak. Jade grinned. We're done. I looked at her. How's the training going? Good. Great, actually. I qualified at 1,000 yards yesterday. Nice work. But I couldn't have done it without what you taught me. About listening, about trusting the pattern. I nodded. That's the foundation. Everything else builds on that. I looked at the other recruits, standing in a line, waiting. All right, everyone. Tomorrow, 0600 hours, we're doing a live fire exercise. Mountain terrain, variable wind. I want to see what you learned while I was gone. They snapped to attention. Yes, ma'am. I walked toward the transport vehicle. Jade fell in step beside me. Captain, can I ask, what was it like? The mission. I thought about the cold, the altitude, the shot, the way Volkov's body had slumped, the way the cave had echoed, the silence that followed. It was necessary. That was all I said. Because some things you can't explain, you can only carry. 6 months later, 1 year after the Mojave, I was standing in a conference room, Pentagon, sub-level 4, surrounded by generals, colonels, intelligence analysts. Major General Cross was presenting. Operation Silent Dawn was a success. High-value target eliminated, 0 American casualties, minimal collateral damage. She clicked to the next slide, a photo of me on a ridge in Afghanistan. Behind the M24, Captain Sienna Graves executed a shot at 1,400 meters in sub-zero temperatures at 11,000 feet elevation, with variable crosswinds exceeding 20 miles per hour. The target was neutralized with a single round. The room was silent, impressed. Cross clicked to the next slide based on this success and Captain Graves' performance at Outpost Sentinel. I am recommending the formation of a new unit, Tier 1, female operators, specializing in high-risk, high-value target elimination. She looked at me. Captain Graves will command. My heart stopped. Command, a unit, my own team. Cross continued, this unit will operate independently, reporting directly to this office. No oversight from conventional command structures. Maximum operational flexibility. One of the colonels spoke up. General Cross, with all due respect, this seems irregular. It is irregular, that's the point. Our enemies are adapting. We need operators who can think like they do. Captain Graves has proven she can do that. Another general, older, skeptical, and if she fails, Cross didn't blink. Then we shut down the unit. And we go back to relying on drones and satellites, but I don't think she'll fail. She looked at me again. Captain, do you accept? I thought about everything that had led to this moment. My father, Liam, Jade, the mission in the Mojave, the mission in Kandahar, all the people I'd saved, all the people I'd lost. I thought about the cost, the nightmares, the wait, the endless cycle, and I thought about the alternative, walking away, letting someone else take the risk, letting someone less capable. Make the calls, take the shots. I stood up, I accept, on one condition. Cross raised an eyebrow, go ahead. I choose my second in command, Specialist Jade Mercer. Cross smiled, done. 3 months later, the unit was operational. 8 women, all hand-picked, all trained to the highest standard. We operated out of a classified facility somewhere in Virginia. The missions came fast. Syria, Yemen, Eastern Europe, everywhere the digital grid failed, we went in silent lethal. And we didn't miss. Jade became my right hand, my spotter, my voice of reason when the missions got dark. She was everything I'd hoped she'd be, and more. We were in the briefing room one evening, reviewing intel for the next op, a known arms dealer, operating out of a compound in Chechnya. Jade looked up from the file. This guy's smart. He's learned from every mistake. No digital footprint, no satellite phones, just couriers and dead drops. Which is why we're the ones going after him. When do we leave? 72 hours. She nodded, closed the file. Captain, can I say something? Always. A year ago, when you gave me the compass, I didn't understand why. She pulled the compass out of her pocket, held it up. I thought, it's just a piece of metal. Relic. But now, after everything, I get it. What do you get? It's not about the compass, it's about what it represents. Trusting yourself when everything else fails. Listening when everyone else is looking. She set the compass on the table. You didn't just teach me to shoot, you taught me to think. And that's worth more than any weapon. I felt that familiar knot in my chest, the one that appeared every time someone reminded me why I do this. Jade, that compass is yours. Hey, keep it, pass it on. When you find someone worth teaching. She smiled. I will. She stood up. I'm going to hit the range, work on my wind calls. You want to come? Yeah, let's go. We walked out of the briefing room into the cool evening air. The range was empty, quiet, just the way I liked it. Jade set up her rifle. I grabbed my spotting scope. She settled into position, target 800 yards. Wind, I looked through the scope, checked the mirage, the heat shimmer, 5 miles per hour. Left to right, steady. She adjusted. Elevation, dial up 18 minutes. She made the adjustment, controlled her breathing, fired. The bullet flew across the range, hit the target. Center mass. She looked at me, grinning. How was that? Perfect. And it was, not just the shot, but everything, this moment, this place, this legacy. My father had taught me. I had taught Jade. Jade would teach the next generation, and the cycle would continue. Long after I was gone, that night, I sat in my quarters, alone, writing a letter. To Liam, checking in, making sure he was okay. He'd been doing better. The therapy was helping. He'd started teaching at a community college. History, he said, talking about the past. Helped him make peace with it. I finished the letter, sealed it, set it aside, and I pulled out a small wooden box from my desk drawer inside, my father's dog tags. A faded photograph, him in uniform, standing next to a young lieutenant, Liam's father, both of them smiling. Young, invincible, before the desert took one, and grief took the other. I held the photograph, and I whispered, I kept my promise, Dad. I didn't let the machine win. I put the photo back, closed the box, and I made another promise. To myself, when this is over, when I've trained enough people, when the next generation is ready, I'll walk away, I'll find peace, I'll learn to sleep, without the nightmares. But not yet, not while there's still work to do, not while there are still ghosts to hunt, not while there are still people who need someone to listen. When the world only knows how to look, I turned off the light, laid down, and I let the darkness take me, knowing that tomorrow I'd wake up and do it all again. Because that's what we do. We stand in the gap, we make the hard calls, we take the impossible shots, and we don't miss. Not because we're perfect, but because we can't afford to be anything less. 5 years later, I was sitting on a porch, small cabin, Montana, middle of nowhere, watching the sunset over the mountains. I'd retired, finally, after 15 years of service. After 100 missions, after 1,000 shots, I'd walked away, handed command to Jade, who was ready, more than ready, and I'd come here, to the quiet, to the peace. To the life my father never got to live. A truck pulled up the dirt road, familiar engine sound, Flint. He climbed out, carrying a 6-pack of beer, walked up to the porch. Sat down in the chair next to me, handed me a bottle. Thought you could use some company. Thanks. We sat in silence, watching the light fade, the stars beginning to appear. You miss it, he asked. I thought about that. Sometimes. But not enough to go back. Good. You earned this. He took a sip of his beer. Jade's doing well, took down a target in Belarus last month, clean shot, no complications. She always was a natural. She learned from the best. I smiled. We both know that's you. He laughed. I taught her to read wind. You taught her to think. There's a difference. We fell silent again, the kind of comfortable silence. That only comes after you've been through hell together and made it out alive. You hear about Liam? Flint asked. Yeah, he got married, started a family. He sent me a photo. Good for him. Yeah. I looked up at the stars, at the constellations my father had taught me. You ever think about what we did, Flint? Whether it mattered? Every day. And I think, we saved a lot of lives, we stopped a lot of bad people, we trained a lot of good ones. That's got to count for something, but was it enough? He turned to look at me. You want the truth? Always. It's never enough. No matter how many missions you run, no matter how many people you save, there's always one more ghost, one more threat, one more shot to take. He paused. But that's not your job anymore. You did your part. Now it's Jade's turn. And when she's done, it'll be someone else's. I nodded slowly. You're right. I usually am. We sat there until the stars filled the sky, and the night grew cold, and the world felt, for the first time in a long time, peaceful. I stood up. I'm heading in. You staying? Nah. Gotta get back. Long drive. Thanks for coming, Flint. Anytime, Captain. He walked to his truck, paused. Hey, Sienna. Yeah? Your old man would be proud. I felt my throat tighten. Thanks. He nodded. Got in the truck. Drove away. I stood on the porch. Alone, looking up at the infinite black, and I whispered, one last time, I hope so, Dad. I really hope so. Then I went inside, closed the door, and let the silence. Finally, embrace me. 10 years after Montana, I got a letter from Jade, now a colonel, still commanding the unit, still hunting ghosts. She wrote, Captain Graves, I wanted you to know. We completed Operation Nightfall last week. High-value target, Eastern Ukraine. 0 casualties, mission success. I thought of you the whole time, every wind call, every adjustment, every breath. I could hear your voice telling me to trust the pattern, to listen when everyone else is looking. We're training the next generation now. I found a recruit. Reminds me of me. Hungry, fierce, a little reckless. Her name is Corporal Reina Santos. I gave her the compass. I hope that's okay. Thank you for everything, for teaching me, for trusting me. For showing me that legacy isn't about what you take, it's about what you leave behind. The mission continues, the line holds, because you taught us how, respectfully. Colonel Jade Mercer. I folded the letter, set it on the table, and I smiled, because that's all I ever wanted, to pass it on, to leave something behind, to make sure that when the machines fail, when the screens go dark, when the satellites fall silent, there will still be someone who knows how to listen, who knows how to think. Who knows how to take the impossible shot? And I realized, sitting there in my quiet cabin in the middle of nowhere, that my father's legacy lived on, not in monuments, or medals, or history books, but in the hands of every person I'd ever taught, every person who would teach the next and the next and the next, forever until the end of time. And that was enough. The silent guardian watches, the line holds, the legacy lives.